Imagine walking into your new workplace knowing that half the people there think you don't belong. Every conversation stops when you enter the room. Every assignment feels like a test designed to prove you're not qualified. You hear the whispers, diversity hire, quota filling, political correctness gone wrong. Then one day, while you're enduring another round of barely concealed contempt, the door opens and a 4-star general walks in. Everyone snaps to attention, but his eyes find only you. And then he does something that shatters every assumption in the room. He salutes you with the kind of respect reserved for legends. What happened next would prove that sometimes the people others dismiss as unqualified are actually the most qualified person in the room. Sometimes the greatest expertise comes wrapped in packages that don't fit expectations. And sometimes the most dangerous assumption is thinking you know someone's story before you've heard it told. Major Dr. Amara Okafor had grown accustomed to being the only black woman in the room. At 34, she had earned her doctorate in aeronautical engineering from MIT, completed a tour as a test pilot, and published groundbreaking research on hypersonic flight dynamics. But none of that seemed to matter to her new colleagues at the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Development Division. From her first day, the message was clear. She was there to fill a quota, not to contribute. The subtle signs were everywhere. Colleagues who forgot to include her in meetings, projects assigned to less qualified personnel while she was given administrative busy work, and the persistent undertone that suggested her presence was more about optics than ability. Another one of those diversity initiatives, she had overheard Colonel Peterson mutter to his aide as she passed in the hallway. Pretty soon they'll be promoting people based on everything except competence. Dr. Okafor had said nothing. She had learned long ago that responding to such comments only reinforced the narrative that she was overly sensitive or playing the race card. Instead, she focused on her work, meticulously completing every assignment and volunteering for additional responsibilities that others avoided. But competence, she was learning, wasn't always enough to overcome preconceived notions. The morning that changed everything began like any other. Dr. Okafor arrived at the Pentagon at 0630, 2 hours before most of her colleagues, to review classified reports on the latest Chinese hypersonic weapons tests. The intelligence was troubling. The Chinese had apparently achieved flight speeds and maneuverability that current American defense systems couldn't intercept. As she analyzed the technical specifications, her expertise in hypersonic dynamics allowed her to see patterns that others might miss. The Chinese weren't just building faster weapons. They were building smarter ones, using advanced flight control algorithms that could adapt in real time to defensive countermeasures. By 0800, when her colleagues began arriving, Dr. Okafor had prepared a detailed analysis that identified critical vulnerabilities in current American air defense systems and proposed 3 potential countermeasures. She was eager to share her findings, but the morning briefing proceeded without any request for her input. Colonel Peterson, who led the development team, spent an hour presenting his own assessment of the Chinese tests. His conclusion was that while concerning, the new weapons didn't represent a fundamental shift in capabilities and could be addressed through incremental improvements to existing systems. Any questions or additional thoughts? Peterson asked as he concluded his presentation. Dr. Okafor raised her hand. Sir, I've been analyzing the same intelligence reports, and I believe there are some additional factors we should consider. Peterson's expression didn't change, but the room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Dr. Okafor, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this assessment was prepared by our most experienced team members who have been working on hypersonic systems for over a decade. With respect, sir, my analysis suggests that we may be underestimating the sophistication of their flight control systems. The maneuverability they've demonstrated isn't just about speed, it indicates adaptive algorithms that could potentially... Dr. Okafor, Peterson interrupted, his voice carrying a note of condescension that made several other officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. I'm sure your academic background has given you interesting theoretical perspectives, but we're dealing with real-world applications here. Perhaps it would be better if you focused on learning our established processes before suggesting modifications. The dismissal was swift and complete. Dr. Okafor felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but she maintained her composure and simply nodded. Around the table she could see the mixture of discomfort and satisfaction on various faces. Some colleagues genuinely uncomfortable with the public dismissal, others clearly pleased to see the diversity hire put in her place. As the meeting concluded and officers filed out, Dr. Okafor remained seated, ostensibly organizing her notes but actually fighting to control her emotions. She had faced dismissal and condescension throughout her career, but it never got easier. The constant need to prove herself, to work twice as hard for half the recognition, was exhausting. Rough morning? Dr. Okafor looked up to see Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chin, one of the few colleagues who had shown her any genuine respect. Chin was a second-generation Chinese American whose own path through the military had been marked by similar challenges. Nothing I haven't dealt with before, Dr. Okafor replied, managing a weak smile. Chin sat down beside her, lowering her voice. For what it's worth, I read your preliminary analysis last night. Your insights about adaptive flight control systems are spot on. Peterson's assessment is missing some critical vulnerabilities. Dr. Okafor felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm seeing things that aren't there or if everyone else is missing what seems obvious to me. You're not imagining things, Chin assured her. The problem isn't your analysis, it's that some people here have already decided you don't belong, so they're not willing to listen to what you have to say. As they talked, Dr. Okafor shared more details of her analysis. The Chinese hypersonic weapons weren't just faster. They represented a fundamental advancement in autonomous flight control that could revolutionize warfare. Traditional defense systems relied on predictable flight paths to intercept incoming threats, but these new weapons could change course multiple times during flight, making interception nearly impossible with current technology. Have you documented all of this? Chin asked. Everything's in my classified report. 60 pages of analysis, complete with mathematical models and proposed countermeasures. Dr. Okafor's voice carried a note of frustration. Not that anyone will read it. Chin was quiet for a moment, then made a decision that would change everything. Amara, what if I told you there was someone who would not only read your report but actually understand its implications? I'd say that person probably doesn't work in this building, Dr. Okafor replied with bitter humor. Actually, he's visiting this building today. General William Harrison is coming for a classified briefing on Chinese weapons developments. He's different from most flag officers. He actually listens to good ideas regardless of where they come from. Dr. Okafor had heard of General Harrison, a four-star general with a reputation for cutting through bureaucracy and politics to focus on what actually worked. He had risen through the ranks based on merit and was known for promoting officers who produced results rather than those who played politics well. What are you suggesting? Dr. Okafor asked. I'm suggesting that if you happen to be in the right place at the right time with the right information, General Harrison might be interested in hearing what you have to say. Chin paused. But it would be unofficial. And if it backfires, I can't protect you from the consequences. Dr. Okafor weighed the risks. Going around her chain of command to brief a four-star general could end her career if it went wrong. But staying silent while critical intelligence was ignored could cost American lives if she was right about the threat. Where and when? She asked. 3 hours later, Dr. Okafor found herself in conference room 3A, ostensibly there to provide technical support for the afternoon briefing. In reality, she was waiting for an opportunity that might never come. General Harrison arrived precisely on time, accompanied by his aide and 2 other flag officers. He was smaller than Dr. Okafor had expected, maybe 5'8", but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command. His eyes, she noticed, were constantly moving, taking in details that others might miss. Colonel Peterson began his presentation with the same assessment he had given that morning. As he spoke, Dr. Okafor watched General Harrison's face for any sign of reaction. The general listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that suggested he understood the technical details far better than most flag officers. So your assessment, Colonel, is that while these Chinese developments are concerning, they don't represent a paradigm shift in capabilities? General Harrison asked as Peterson concluded. That's correct, sir. We believe incremental improvements to our existing systems will be sufficient to maintain defensive superiority. General Harrison nodded slowly, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. And this assessment is based on analysis of the complete intelligence package? Yes, sir. Our most experienced team has reviewed all available data. That's when General Harrison's eyes found Dr. Okafor. She was sitting at the back of the room, technically present as support staff but clearly not part of the primary briefing team. Major, the general said, addressing her directly. You've been quiet throughout this briefing. Do you have any thoughts on Colonel Peterson's assessment? The room fell silent. Dr. Okafor could feel every eye in the room on her, could sense the collective tension as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Colonel Peterson's face had gone rigid with barely controlled anger. Sir, Peterson interjected, Major Okafor is here in a support capacity. She hasn't been involved in the primary analysis. General Harrison's gaze never left Dr. Okafor's face. I asked the Major for her thoughts, Colonel. Major? This was the moment. Dr. Okafor could play it safe, defer to her superiors and maintain the status quo. Or she could risk everything on the chance that this general was different from the others. Sir, with respect to Colonel Peterson's analysis, I believe we may be underestimating the significance of what the Chinese have achieved. Her voice was steady despite the hammering of her heart. How so? Dr. Okafor stood and moved to the front of the room, her confidence growing as she entered familiar territory. The flight characteristics we've observed don't just indicate improved speed or maneuverability. They suggest the implementation of real-time adaptive flight control systems that represent a fundamental advancement in autonomous weapons technology. She moved to the whiteboard and began sketching flight path diagrams with practiced efficiency. Traditional intercept calculations rely on predictable ballistic trajectories. But if these weapons can modify their flight paths in real time based on defensive responses, our entire defensive posture becomes obsolete. As she spoke, drawing complex mathematical relationships and explaining the implications in clear, concise terms, the room's atmosphere began to change. General Harrison leaned forward, his attention completely focused on her analysis. "You're suggesting these aren't just hypersonic weapons," the general said. "You're suggesting they're hypersonic weapons with artificial intelligence." "Exactly, sir. And if that's the case, then incremental improvements to our existing systems won't be sufficient. We need to fundamentally rethink our approach to defensive systems." Dr. Okafor spent the next 20 minutes walking through her complete analysis, explaining not just what the Chinese had achieved but how they had likely achieved it and what it meant for American defense capabilities. Her presentation was flawless, combining deep technical expertise with clear strategic thinking. When she finished, the room was silent. General Harrison studied the diagrams on the whiteboard for several long moments before speaking. "Major Okafor, this analysis, have you documented it in a formal report?" "Yes, sir. 60 pages with supporting mathematical models and 3 proposed countermeasure strategies." "And this report has been reviewed by your chain of command?" Dr. Okafor glanced at Colonel Peterson, whose face had gone pale. "It was submitted this morning, sir." General Harrison turned to Peterson. "Colonel, why wasn't this analysis included in your briefing?" Peterson stammered for a moment before finding his voice. "Sir, Major Okafor's analysis represents an interesting theoretical perspective, but our assessment is based on proven methodologies and extensive experience with hypersonic systems." "Proven methodologies that fail to identify the implications that Major Okafor just explained in 20 minutes? The general's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath it. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Okafor realized that she was witnessing something rare, a 4-star general publicly questioning the competence of a colonel in front of his subordinates. "Major," General Harrison said, turning back to her, "I want to see your complete analysis. Can you have it in my hands within the hour?" "Yes, sir." "Good. I also want you to prepare a briefing for the Joint Chiefs. We'll be meeting tomorrow morning at 0800. Dr. Okafor felt the world tilt slightly. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military authority in the United States. "Sir, I should mention that I would need security clearance upgrades to access some of the classified systems necessary for a complete briefing." General Harrison smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Major, I have a feeling that won't be a problem." As the meeting concluded and officers began filing out, Dr. Okafor found herself alone with General Harrison and his aide. "Major," the general said quietly, "how long have you been trying to get someone to listen to this analysis?" "This particular analysis?" "Since this morning, sir." "But similar patterns in Chinese weapons development?" "About 6 months." General Harrison was quiet for a moment. "And in those 6 months, how many of your insights have been dismissed or ignored?" Dr. Okafor considered lying, giving a diplomatic answer that wouldn't rock the boat further. But something about the general's manner encouraged honesty. "Most of them, sir. I've submitted 14 separate reports on various aspects of Chinese military technological advancement. 3 were acknowledged, 1 was partially implemented, and the rest were filed without action." "I see." General Harrison's expression darkened. "Major, I'm going to ask you a direct question and I want a direct answer. Do you believe your analysis has been dismissed because of its content or because of who you are?" The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Dr. Okafor knew that her answer could have serious repercussions, not just for her but for others in the command structure. "Sir, I believe that unconscious bias may have influenced how my work has been received," she said carefully. General Harrison nodded slowly. Major, I've been in the Army for 32 years. I've seen a lot of talented people passed over, ignored, or dismissed for reasons that had nothing to do with their capabilities. He paused. I've also learned that the military's greatest weakness isn't our enemies, it's our tendency to waste the talent we already have because it doesn't look like what we expect. He moved to the window, looking out at the Pentagon's inner courtyard. Your analysis this afternoon was the most insightful assessment of Chinese weapons capabilities I've heard in months. It demonstrated not just technical expertise but strategic thinking of the highest order. Dr. Okafor felt a mixture of validation and disbelief. After months of being dismissed and marginalized, having her work recognized by the highest levels of military leadership felt almost surreal. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. General Harrison turned back to her, and his expression became serious. Major, tomorrow you're going to brief the Joint Chiefs of Staff. There will be people in that room who outrank me, people who have been making strategic decisions for decades. Some of them may be skeptical of your conclusions, and some may be skeptical of you personally. He paused, letting that sink in. But I want you to remember something. You earned your place in that room through excellence, not through charity. Your analysis is sound, your conclusions are logical, and your recommendations could save American lives. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The next morning, Dr. Okafor found herself in the Pentagon's most secure briefing room, facing the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the most powerful military leaders in the world. As she began her presentation, she could see the familiar skepticism in some faces, the questioning looks that she had encountered throughout her career. But as she walked through her analysis, explaining the implications of Chinese AI-guided hypersonic weapons and demonstrating the vulnerabilities in current American defense systems, the skepticism gradually gave way to attention, then to concern, and finally to alarm. Major Okafor, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, said as she concluded, "If your analysis is correct, we're facing a paradigm shift that could fundamentally alter the balance of military power. What do you recommend?" Dr. Okafor outlined her three-pronged strategy: immediate upgrades to existing defense systems to buy time, accelerated development of AI-guided interceptor systems, and a long-term research program to develop quantum-enhanced defensive technologies. The questions that followed were sharp and detailed, but they were the questions of people taking her seriously, not the dismissive challenges she had grown accustomed to. When the briefing ended, the chairman himself thanked her for her analysis and promised that her recommendations would receive immediate attention. As the room cleared, General Harrison approached her one final time. "Outstanding work, Major. I have one more piece of news for you." "Sir?" "Effective immediately, you're being promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and assigned as my special advisor on advanced weapons systems. Your first task will be to lead a joint task force implementing the countermeasures you just recommended." Dr. Okafor felt tears threatening to overwhelm her professional composure. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. You've already proven everything that needed proving." He paused. "But I do want to tell you something that might help you in the future." "Yes, sir?" "Excellence has a way of revealing itself, no matter how much some people try to hide it. You are not here because of any diversity initiative or political correctness. You are here because you are one of the most brilliant strategic minds I've encountered in 3 decades of service." His voice became firm. "Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." 6 months later, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Amara Okafor stood in the same Pentagon briefing room where she had once been dismissed, but now she was the one giving the briefing. Her task force had successfully developed and deployed the first generation of AI-enhanced defense systems, and early tests showed they could successfully intercept the Chinese hypersonic weapons that had seemed unstoppable just months before. In the audience sat Colonel Peterson, who had since been reassigned to a logistics position. When their eyes met, he nodded with what might have been respect or simply resignation. After the briefing, as Dr. Okafor packed up her materials, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The whispers of diversity hire had largely faded, replaced by recognition of her contributions to national security. But she knew that other talented people, women, minorities, and anyone else who didn't fit the traditional mold, were still fighting the same battles she had faced. That evening she received a message that made her smile. It was from a young black female cadet at West Point who had heard about Dr. Okafor's work and wanted to pursue a career in advanced weapons systems. "Ma'am," the message read, "I wanted you to know that knowing someone like me can succeed in this field gives me hope that I can too. Thank you for proving that excellence speaks for itself." Dr. Okafor replied immediately, "Excellence does speak for itself, but sometimes it takes a while for people to learn how to listen. Keep working, keep pushing, and never let anyone convince you that you don't belong. You earned your place at the table, now use it to help others find theirs. As she hit send, Dr. Okafor thought about General Harrison's words from that day in the briefing room. Excellence has a way of revealing itself, no matter how much some people try to hide it. The key was not just achieving excellence, but having the courage to keep demonstrating it until the right people finally paid attention. Sometimes the most dangerous assumption is thinking you know someone's capabilities based on their appearance. Sometimes the greatest expertise comes from unexpected sources. And sometimes the person others dismiss as a diversity hire is actually the most qualified person in the room. They just needed someone brave enough to listen to what they had to say. Dr. Okafor's story reminds us that true leadership isn't about protecting your own assumptions. It's about recognizing excellence wherever you find it and having the wisdom to elevate it, regardless of the package it comes in. Because in the end, the greatest threats to any organization aren't external enemies, they're the internal biases that cause us to waste the talent we already have.